I still remember the way she walked into our home that fateful morning, her presence lighting up the space as if nothing in the world could dim her glow. She was radiant, her hair perfectly tousled, her smile wide and carefree, as though she just returned from some luxurious retreat. The soft rustle of her bag landing on the entryway table was followed by her laughter, a sound that once made my heart soar but now felt like the cruelest taunt. I stood in the kitchen, gripping my coffee mug, pretending to scroll through my phone, though my chest burned with a weight I couldn't shake. "Morning, babe," she chirped, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips were soft, familiar, but there was a hollowness in the gesture, a practiced ease that made my stomach churn. "Morning," I managed, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. My knuckles turned white around the mug as I held myself back from blurting out everything I knew. Confrontation would come, but not now. Not like this. I wanted her to see the truth, to face it head-on with no room for denial. "My name is Daniel, and for 8 years, I was married to Claire." On the outside, we were the couple everyone envied, steady careers, a beautiful home in Willow Heights, and a love story that seemed like it had been plucked from the pages of a romance novel. She was my everything. The college sweetheart who had laughed at my awkward jokes, the woman who had cried with joy when I proposed on the beach at sunset. Together, we built a life that felt unshakable. At least, that's what I believed. The cracks began to show a month ago. At first, they were barely noticeable. Late nights at work, a newfound attachment to her phone, an air of detachment I couldn't quite place. I chalked it up to stress. Her role as the lead designer at Nova Vision, a fast-paced tech firm, often came with high demands. But then the excuses started piling up. Business dinners that didn't add up. A girls' trip that seemed hastily planned. I caught her turning her phone away from me when notifications lit up the screen. It was a gut feeling at first, that gnawing instinct you try to dismiss because the alternative is unthinkable. But suspicion has a way of growing roots, digging deeper until it takes over every waking thought. One evening, when she was working late, I gave in to the paranoia. I opened her laptop, an act I hated myself for even as I did it. And there it was, an email thread she had forgotten to close. The name Ryan appeared too often, in a context far too personal. He was her colleague, someone I had met briefly at a company event. I remembered shaking his hand, oblivious to the reality that this man was dismantling my marriage from the inside out. The evidence snowballed. A hotel reservation in both their names. A series of texts that left no room for doubt. Still, I hesitated. Confronting her felt like stepping off a cliff into the unknown. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting? But then I found the final piece. A photo buried in her phone, the two of them at a rooftop bar, her head resting on his shoulder as if it belonged there. That night, while she was at one of her supposed work dinners, I prepared. A small camera, discreetly placed in our living room, captured everything. Her laughter, their closeness, the way they stumbled into the space we had once called ours, completely oblivious to the sanctity they were shattering. I saved the footage, edited it into a concise montage, and uploaded it to a folder labeled Claire's Choices. The next morning, I connected it to the living room TV. When Claire returned home, she was all lightness and ease, tossing her jacket onto the couch and greeting me with the same practiced charm. I played my role, keeping the anger and heartbreak bottled up as she settled onto the sofa. She grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, distractedly scrolling through her phone until the sound began. It started subtly, her laughter mingling with the low hum of a crowded room. Her gaze snapped up to the screen. The color drained from her face as she saw herself, seated too close to Ryan, her hand lingering on his. The video shifted to their entry into our living room, their bodies intertwined. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling as her phone slipped from her hands. I stood behind her, my arms crossed, my face calm though every nerve in my body was screaming. "You tell me, Claire." She scrambled for the remote, but I was faster, snatching it away before she could stop the playback. "No," I said sharply, my tone leaving no room for argument. "You wanted to keep this from me? Then watch. Watch what you've done." Tears welled in her eyes as the footage continued, each moment playing out in damning clarity. "Daniel, please," she began, her voice cracking. "This isn't. Don't." My voice was steel. "Don't insult me with excuses." Her tears came in earnest now, streaming down her face as she pleaded for understanding, for forgiveness. But the image of her and Ryan, laughing together as if the life we had built was nothing but a footnote, was seared into my mind. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I love you, Daniel." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to my own ears. "You call this a mistake? Bringing him here into our home? Into the life we built together?" She reached for me, but I stepped back, my hands raised as if warding off a threat. "Don't touch me," I said. My voice was quiet, controlled, but every word was laced with venom. From the shelf beside me, I grabbed a folder and tossed it onto the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she asked, her hands shaking as she opened it. "Your future," I replied coldly. Inside were the divorce papers, signed and ready to file. "You don't get to destroy everything and walk away unscathed, Claire. Actions have consequences." Her sobs turned into incoherent protests as she flipped through the pages, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, Daniel, don't do this. We can fix this. I'll do anything." I shook my head, the finality of the moment settling over me. "You already made your choice, Claire, and now I'm making mine." As I turned to leave, her cries echoed through the room. I didn't look back. The weight I had carried for weeks began to lift with each step toward the door. Outside, the crisp air filled my lungs, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I didn't waste any time after that. My suitcase was already packed and waiting by the door. I had spent the previous night methodically gathering everything I needed, leaving behind the hollow shell of a home that once held so much promise. Each item I chose to take felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My books, my clothes, the framed photo of my parents that Claire never liked. Everything else? She could have it. Let it haunt her. As I drove away from the house, my grip on the steering wheel tightened, and the emotions I had held back came rushing in like a tidal wave. Anger, betrayal, sadness. How could she? After everything we'd built, every promise we'd made. But amidst the chaos of those feelings, there was also relief. A quiet, steady voice in the back of my mind whispering that I'd done the right thing. That this was the beginning of something new, even if it didn't feel that way just yet. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and legal meetings. Claire tried everything to delay the process. She called me incessantly, leaving tearful voicemails about how sorry she was, how she'd made a mistake, how she couldn't imagine her life without me. But every word she said only deepened the wound. If she couldn't imagine life without me, why had she chosen someone else? Why had she risked everything for meaningless moments with him? Her attempts to reconcile grew more desperate. One day, she showed up unannounced at my temporary apartment, a modest one-bedroom I had rented downtown. She stood there in the hallway, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, clutching a box of what I assumed were memories she hoped would sway me. Old photos, handwritten notes, trinkets from our years together. "Daniel, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm begging you. Don't throw this away." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You threw it away, Claire. The moment you let him into our lives." "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. I was lost, confused. "It didn't mean anything. You have to believe me." "I don't have to believe anything," I replied, my tone cold but steady. "And you don't get to rewrite the narrative now. You made your choices. I'm just living with the consequences." She stared at me, her bottom lip trembling, before placing the box at my feet. "Please, just look through this. Remember what we had. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't answer. Instead, I closed the door, the sound echoing through the hallway like a final nail in the coffin. The box stayed there for days until I eventually carried it to the building's garbage chute and let it fall into oblivion. Meanwhile, the world around us reacted in waves. Friends reached out, some shocked, others offering their support. A few even admitted they had suspected something was off with Claire but hadn't wanted to interfere. Mutual friends divided like the Red Sea, some siding with her, believing her sob story about how she had just made a mistake, while others stood firmly by me, disgusted by her betrayal. As for Ryan, I heard through the grapevine that their so-called relationship crumbled within months. Whatever spark they had shared fizzled out once the excitement of secrecy was replaced by the harsh light of reality. It turned out he had a history of chasing after married women, relishing the thrill of it but never committing when things got serious. I felt a grim satisfaction when I learned Claire had moved out of her apartment and back into her parents' house in Crestview, starting over in the shadow of her choices. For me, starting over meant something different. I threw myself into my work, rediscovered old hobbies, and spent time with friends who reminded me what it felt like to laugh without a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I began therapy, unpacking not just the pain of Claire's betrayal, but also the ways I had ignored my own needs in the relationship, prioritizing her happiness above my own. Months turned into a year, and slowly, the anger subsided. It didn't disappear completely. It left its mark as all deep wounds do, but it no longer defined me. I found a new apartment, one with large windows that flooded the space with light, and filled it with plants and art that made it feel alive. I started running in the mornings, each step pounding out the remnants of my grief until all that remained was clarity. People often asked me if I regretted how I handled things, if I wished I had been less cold, more forgiving, more understanding. The truth was, I didn't. Claire's betrayal wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a calculated series of choices that showed a complete disregard for the life we had built together. Forgiveness might come one day, but reconciliation never would. And I was okay with that. The last time I saw Claire was at a mutual friend's wedding. She approached me hesitantly, her once confident demeanor replaced by something quieter, almost timid. She congratulated me on how well I seemed to be doing, her eyes scanning my face as if searching for a trace of the man she had known. I smiled politely, thanked her, and walked away, leaving her standing there among a sea of people who no longer knew her as my wife. I had won, but not in the way she might have thought. It wasn't about the divorce settlement, though the prenuptial agreement had ensured she walked away with little. It wasn't about proving a point or making her suffer. My victory was in reclaiming myself, in building a life that was full, authentic, and free from the shadows of her betrayal. As I sat on my balcony that evening, watching the city lights flicker against the horizon, I felt a profound sense of peace. Life had a way of breaking you, but it also had a way of remaking you if you let it. And in that moment, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be.